Good morning and welcome to our virtual forum series. I'm Pam Trace. I'm the Executive Director of Westside Economic Alliance, and I'm happy to welcome you to the Local Economic Landscape and the Outlook Moving Forward presentation. I want to thank our sponsors this morning. I want to thank Intel for their sponsorship of this particular event, and also I want to thank Legacy Health for their ongoing sponsorship of the virtual forum series. I'm going to say a few words about about Legacy in just a few minutes. But first of all, I want to say what a great attendance we have today. We have 140 people here. So I'm sure as we get through this, you're going to have lots of questions, and I can't commit to getting to every single question, but we will try hard. So at this time, what I'd like to do is recognize the Westside Economic Alliance board members while Teresa shares the screen with their names and positions. Thank you, board members, for your support to the organization and the hard work you put in working toward our success. It is much appreciated. I'd also like to recognize the electeds that are with us today. So Teresa, would you share that screen? It's always nice to see that we have a good representation of public leadership as well. So thank you for your service and thanks for being here. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney Martin from Intel. Courtney's going to talk to us a little bit and show us a video of what's happening out there. Over to you, Courtney.
Thank you, Pam, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you today. As Pam mentioned, I wanted to start off with a few remarks, and then I will be sharing a video. As many of you saw a few weeks ago, our new CEO, Pat Gelsinger, outlined the company's path forward to manufacturing and design leadership. He shared his vision for IDM 2.0, which is a major evolution of Intel's integrated device manufacturing model, which is our winning formula in the ever-increasing competitive semiconductor industry. As Pat said, and he reminds us weekly in our very engaging Friday employee calls, that our team is fired up, and I have full confidence that Intel is in a very strong competitive position and our best days are ahead. So we're excited. This is good news for Oregon. A key pillar of this renewed strategy is a commitment to Intel's manufacturing network, which, as many of you know, includes within Intel's Oregon operations, the heart of our research and development activity and manufacturing. Going to share here. As many of you know, we are currently in the midst of an expansion out at our Ronler Acres campus, and this is well underway. Oh, there we go. Can you see that now, Pam?
Yes, we can.
We're good on the video? Okay. This Ronler Acres expansion started at 2019, and currently we have more than 3,000 electricians, plumbers, welders, and other trade workers supporting this activity and the billions of dollars invested since 2019. We actually just reached an exciting milestone of over 7 million trades worker hours on this project, which is more than both of the two previous mods combined. Intel has a widespread economic impact throughout all sectors of our economy, through our operational spending to keep the business running, through our capital investments for new construction projects like Mod 3, and through our supplier network, which is a vast network of over 500 Oregon-based companies that are small, medium, and large. Based on 2019 data, including our direct investments, our supply chain impacts, our capital investments, and other downstream impacts, our total economic footprint in Oregon supports over 105,000 jobs, 10 billion in labor income, and over 19 billion in GDP. Intel has been and will continue to be a pillar of Oregon's economy, which is good news for Oregonians. And now more than ever, we think that the semiconductor industry and manufacturing particularly at the U.S. level, and therefore here in Oregon, is poised to be a driver of economic recovery and resiliency. And we're especially excited to see the governor highlighting manufacturing as part of the 10-point economic recovery plan, and we're excited to be part of that effort. We're proud to be a partner with the Westside Economic Alliance for the past 22 years. And thank you, Pam and team, for continuing to advocate for a healthy economic environment. I'm excited to hear from the folks that are here with us on the panel today. And thank you all again for being here. And I'll send it back over to you, Pam.
Thank you, Courtney. And that was an impressive video. Man, there's a lot going on out there. It's really very impressive. I want to remind everybody, by the way, that this virtual session is being recorded. And what we do is we record this and then we post it on our website for others who may not have had the chance to attend to take a look. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Legacy as our virtual series sponsor. A couple words from Legacy. When Legacy Health came together with OHSU, Kaiser, and Providence to launch the All for Oregon mass vaccination clinic in late January, they recognized that bringing the COVID-19 pandemic to an end would require safely and efficiently vaccinating people as quickly as possible. To date, All for Oregon has delivered over 300,000 vaccinations to over 200,000 Oregonians. Legacy appreciates the patience and the support from the business community as they strive to vaccinate the priority groups as established by the Oregon Health Authority: teachers, childcare workers, older adults, and high-risk health categories. Legacy looks forward to April 19th, that's only 1 week away. April 19th, when all Oregonians 16 and older become eligible for the COVID vaccine. Legacy wants to take this opportunity as our forum sponsor to publicly thank their Washington County and Clackamas County partners in public health, emergency services, and the healthcare community, all of whom are playing a crucial role to help our region reach herd immunity. Legacy, thank you so much for all that you're doing for our community, and we really look forward to next week when everybody is eligible and reaching that herd immunity level. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers and our process for today. So each of you should have received a program that introduces our presenters, and there's a brief bio by each presenter's picture. So as we start, John Tapogna will lay the groundwork for us with a 15-minute slide presentation. And then, did you see John just look at his watch? I think he did. My eyes are on you, John. So, and then Raihana will follow with a bit shorter overview from the state, and John Southgate will close with a local overview. After that, I'm going to be moderating questions. I'm going to ask you to put your questions into the Q&A portion of our virtual meeting. I will be asking the presenters the questions as they pop up. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John and say welcome, and you don't have to stay right at 15 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pam. And this is always the most challenging part of the presentation for me, is just to get the thing started. And did I do it? Can folks see these slides? Excellent, thank you. All right, well, I think I'll just start by saying April 2021 feels a whole lot better than April 2020. You know, a year ago we were in lockdown and we're anticipating potentially unemployment rates in the teens through the end of the year. With no sense, we were still talking at that time of sort of the all-time record for vaccinations being the mumps vaccine at 4 years. So there was, it was unclear whether we were going to exit this through vaccine or we're going to exit this pandemic through herd immunity. And a lot has gone right. And I would say that if you sort of step back a year ago and had known that this presentation I'm about to give you was where we would land, you probably would have said, we'll take it. So let's step through. I'm going to give a brief overview on where we stand now, and I'm going to sort of step through some factors that I see as those affecting the rebuilding period in front of us. So where do we stand? First and foremost, the economy and the public health crisis have been one and the same. Fix the public health crisis, control the pandemic, the economy will start to take care of itself. We're going to see that happen. Here's cumulative death rates in Washington County and the state of Oregon up to this point, 37 per 100,000 population for the county, 56 per 100,000 population. For the state of Oregon, these other gray lines are other counties in the state of Oregon, but I've got a note up there on the national death rate cumulative to this point, 165 per 100,000. So the county's death rate is less than a quarter of the national average. And that is just staggeringly important. We have, and so thanks to our public leaders, our public health officials, Raihana's boss, and everybody collectively sort of paying attention, putting their masks on, and now more recently, getting in line for those vaccines and getting vaccinated, et cetera. Oregon is going to come out on the other side of this pandemic a winner on the public health front, and it's been a big collective effort on all of our fronts, and I think it's going to pay dividends for the economy going forward. So that's the first piece of good news. Of course, that has come at a cost because we have been more socially distant than many other places. So these are Portland regional job loss rates through January 21 of this year. Sort of the shaded bar goes out to the peak of where those losses were over the course of last year, and the darker with the percentages showing you where it stood in January. So if you drop to the bottom, you see the job losses in the places you would expect to see them, in the accommodation, the hotel, lodging, et cetera, down more than 50% still as of January. The food services and drinking places by more than a third. Local education in that particular line, that's an awful lot of sort of private sector college and the like losses, and then transportation manufacturing, sizable losses there, led by Precision Cast Parts in this region with their supply chain connections into Boeing, and losses there in that travel sector. So very intuitive when you look at these job losses. What has happened in this economy is that those industries that have been most tightly tied to social distancing requirements are the ones that have taken the disproportionate hits. And what we have been able to do is insulate, to a pretty large extent, damage to other industries that don't have as strict social distancing requirements associated with them. In terms of the county's story, these are unemployment rates, going back to the 1990s. The red is the national unemployment rate. The blue is the Washington County unemployment rate. Just by comparison, if you sort of look over past recessions, we go back in particular to that 2000 recession, you can see the county spiking there well above the US level. That was a tech bust, and that did hit the county particularly hard. County overperformed on this metric during the last expansion. You see that blue line below the national line throughout most of that period. And then if you sort of see that big jump and back down, the blue, the county's rate, never rises as high as the national, and still hanging in there sort of below the national level. So again, Washington County, not it has its tourism and it has its food establishments, et cetera, but not as dependent on those industries as even downtown Portland, but especially not as much as places like Las Vegas, New Orleans, places in Florida, et cetera. What we have to pay attention to as we're coming out of this, and the census does a pretty good job of keeping a sort of a pulse on households and businesses, is how are households doing as we are emerging from this pandemic. These are sort of weekly surveys that are done. This one was done in middle of March. It's statewide for sample sizes, but what share of renting households are behind on their rent? And that's important for federal government, state and local governments to pay attention to as the pandemic comes to a close. You can see Oregon's BIPOC population of renters, almost 1 in 5 saying they're behind on the rent payments. That is well above the rate reported by white households. Interestingly, Oregon's rate's quite a bit lower than the national rates, and I can't say I have a story for that one yet, but we'll just take it for good news and hope that this real-time reporting is true, that we're a little bit less severe than the U.S. up to this point. In terms of the projections, this from the state's economist in the most recent economic forecast. Here are job losses in the several most recent recessions, the various lines there, compared to this 2020 recession. So you can see that huge, very sharp reduction right out of the gate to 12% employment loss, down sort of a nice bounce back immediately as we reopened last June, and then this sort of gradual coming back with their current forecast being full employment by the first quarter of 2023. That was not the story that they were telling a year ago at this time. They were looking at 2024, maybe even 2025 as a possibility to get employment levels back to the pre-pandemic levels. So this recovery coming along much better than economists would have been projecting a year ago at this time. So that's where I would say we stand, and now I'm going to sort of turn to factors that are going to influence how this region rebuilds. And I've just got 5 or so of those factors. The first is how the sort of the federal response and the state and local government use of that federal response in households and businesses, et cetera, sort of plays out. The multiple rounds of federal fiscal relief are unprecedented, much bigger than anything, even adjusted for inflation from the New Deal, and orders of magnitude, well, not orders of magnitude, but sizably bigger than we had from the Great Recession. They broke down, this is $5.9 trillion across the CARES Act and the December Relief Program, and then the most recent American Rescue Plan that was recently passed, into these broad categories of loan and grant programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, income support like unemployment insurance, and there's some food support, et cetera, health spending to fight the pandemic and to pay for protective equipment and get the vaccines rolling, et cetera. Tax policy, a big play in this most recent package on a child tax credit. And then the yellow is that direct payments, those $1,400 payments in the most recent round. And then we come back to the state and local funding. That is a big one that is in front of policymakers now. Washington County receiving $117 million, Clackamas County $81 million, Hillsborough $18 million, Beaverton $17 million, Tigard $11 million, Tualatin almost $6 million through that. And a lot of sort of interjurisdictional budget allocation decisions that need to be made, some hard, thoughtful work needing to be done between now and when those funds expire at the end of 2024. This is sort of in a macroeconomic lens, what that stimulus package appears to have done. You can see that dotted line going forward was the Congressional Budget Office's projection for sort of the total size of gross domestic product in the nation before the pandemic started. And essentially what this projection from the Brookings Institution is suggesting is that with the implementation of the Biden package, it is so large, together with the CARES package that preceded it, that is going to push economic activity above the level that was projected before the pandemic started. That's a pretty robust response. And the potential cost of that, if there are worries to be had, are around inflation. One way you can keep track of inflation expectations, at least on Wall Street, is to track the difference between the 10-year Treasury maturity rate and the 10-year inflation indexed security maturity rate. And so this is basically saying that the folks that pay attention to that are guessing inflation is going to creep up into the sort of 2.3, maybe 2.4 range over the long run. So we'll keep an eye on that as the economy continues to recover and we start to inevitably see some prices rise, especially in the airline sector and probably in the gas and travel related purchases. Another big factor we've got to pay attention to in this region is progress on racial justice. And what I have here is just sort of a reminder of the lack of mobility for households or young people growing up in the region. This is that Raj Chetty data that we've shown before through the Growing Up Project for Washington County. Parents' income at $25,000. Where did kids growing up in a low-income household end up? In their 30s, you can see for Black boys and girls, very little mobility relative to the income of their parents. A little bit better for Indigenous boys and girls, but nowhere near the mobility that you see for white and Asian households. And so I bring this point out to basically say this region is paying attention to racial justice, and if there isn't steady, sustained progress going forward, I do think we will continue, and justifiably so, see protests throughout the region. Another topic here, property damage, violence, and the perception of Portland. Got a couple slides on these. This one has floated around quite a bit. The Urban Land Institute does surveys of real estate investors, bankers, and the like. This is basically saying, where does Portland rank, and this is regionally, as a place to invest in real estate. If you're sort of at that 100th percentile, it means you're one of the best regions in the country to invest in real estate. As you're falling down that list, you're one of the poorest of 80 or so metros, and you can see that we were the darling in 2017, and we've fallen precipitously in 2021 survey. So again, some of that tied to an awful lot of media coverage last summer on extended protests downtown, and just how slow downtown Portland in particular has begun to open up. Countering that a little bit though, and this is always a tough one to get our hands on, but we're trying to use the, what real-time data are out there, is, are people still moving to this region? And if you go to Redfin, sort of the online real estate broker, their data, and again, this is Redfin data users, so it's a very particular kind of client, but their data is suggesting that they still see searches coming in at a higher rate than folks in Portland are using their engine to leave or to look for real estate outside. So some relatively hopeful news here on data searches from Redfin that would suggest that this region hasn't lost all of its appeal quite yet. That is troubling if we still have people moving in and we aren't building housing. And so this is new private housing structures authorized by building permits in the region. You can see it took a sharp fall with the beginning of the recession. What we don't want have happen, and some of it is just going to happen inevitably because you can't turn these statistics around on a dime, is an extended period of slow permit activity and slow construction while people continue to move into the region. because if that's the case, we're going to come right out of this in the same way we came out of the last recession, and prices, house prices and rents are going to take off and cause all the problems that we saw over the course of the last decade with respect to affordability and then ultimately homelessness. We are going to be paying attention to this sort of a dynamic between the suburbs and the central core and remote work and office work. Again, especially in downtown Portland. Here you can see sort of rent trends leading into 2020 and into 2021. Again, the metro overall average for a one-bedroom apartment fell ever so slightly for a metro average, but you can see that in the city of Portland, that urban core, you're down 4.5%, while the rest of the region is up a couple, 3%, et cetera. So you've got this little bit of a trade-off. You see similar stories coming out of the Redfin data on housing price competitiveness. They have a compete score that's basically looking at, what is, are sellers getting higher than the asking price, and how long are the houses staying on the market? And they sort of throw this together in this index. And you can see that those cities in this broader region, and this region goes all the way down, as you can see, to Albany and Salem, et cetera. But in this much broader region, Tualatin, Gresham, Bethany, Tigard, Aloha are the leaders at the point. And you can see, get down to Portland. That's not a terrible score, 50 in a national, but it's just not suggesting that that market is as hot as it is outside of that center of the region. And then, back to our one of our sponsors of this, paying attention to the future of manufacturing. This is an index of Portland metro manufacturing jobs compared to U.S. manufacturing jobs, an index going back to 2001. Manufacturing, because of automation, is generally in decline with respect to jobs, but Portland and frankly the state of Oregon have done a much better job sort of holding on to that job base than most of the rest of the country. Needless to say, the announcement from a couple of weeks ago from Intel was very welcome news, as is sort of the president's focus on the semiconductor industry and the investments that are proposed in that infrastructure package. So we do wish Intel well in this push, and let's all get behind them and do what we can to help that be successful. So now I'll just end here on some hopeful news. And Pam, I think I used up an extra 4 minutes. Here are infection rates in Israel. Israel has now vaccinated something like 60 to 70% of its population. If you needed anything more than a sort of a clinical trial, here you have it, a sort of country clinical trial. The vaccinations work. So let's all get in line. April 19th, big date. I have an appointment on April 19th. I'm very excited, and hopefully, a couple months from now, we're all talking about backyard barbecues and sort of a gradual renormalization of activity.
Well, thank you, John. That was a great presentation. You've got several questions in the Q&A. We'll get back to those after we've gone through the rest of the presentations. I would like to remind everybody that even when we're vaccinated, you still need to wash your hands and wear your masks, please. So my public service declaration for the day. With that, over to you, Raihana.
Thank you, Pam. Hopefully my audio is okay. Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to participate in today's panel. Good afternoon, everyone. As Pam mentioned, I'm Raihana Ansary, the Governor's Metro Regional Solutions Coordinator, serving Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington counties. John Tapogna is a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. I'm hopeful for the optimistic outlook that he presented, and as John said, it truly is amazing to think about where we are today versus just a little over a year ago. Before I get into the governor's 10-point economic plan, a little bit about the Tri-County metro region. It makes up 44% of the state's population, 51% of the state's employment, 59% of the state's employment payroll, 34% of the state's poverty, 43% of the state's people of color living in poverty, 52% of the state's people of color, and 30% of the metro region are people of color. This represents the greatest concentration of people of color in Oregon. So as we gradually turn a corner in the pandemic and begin to lift restrictions and pivot toward economic recovery, I think it's important to consider this data when seeking to recover stronger, more equitable, and resilient than before the pandemic. As many of you know, the governor a few weeks ago announced her 10-point economic recovery plan. It aims to help families and businesses across the state with a focus on people of color impacted financially, not only by the pandemic, but by the 2020 wildfires. The governor's 10-point plan was developed with input from her Council of Economic Advisors, as well as her Racial Justice Council. It's really intended to be a preliminary outline or roadmap for economic recovery that will help guide the state in prioritizing its share of federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan, or ARP. Between state and local governments, Oregon's slated to receive approximately $6.4 billion in federal funds from the ARP, with about $2.6 billion going directly to the state. Again, the governor sees this as an opportunity to lead with equity and recovery, and not only support those who have traditionally kept our economy going, but to lift up all Oregonians, including those that have been historically marginalized in both urban and rural areas of the state. To that end, she has also laid out her principles for making investment decisions with the ARP dollars. In summary, she believes that investments should be made now in a way that maximizes economic recovery efforts for Oregonians this year, while also addressing the existing disparities that were exacerbated by the pandemic and wildfires, especially for women and BIPOC communities. And she absolutely believes that public accountability and transparency should be a part of the allocation process. I'll review sort of the 10 points in her plan at a high level, and after my remarks, I will be sure to include links to the plan as well as the guiding principles for her investment criteria. The first priority is investing in Oregon's hardest hit workers by extending or expanding unemployment benefits, expanding individual development accounts, wealth building strategies, financial literacy opportunities, and providing funding for nonprofits at the front lines of the crisis. Her second priority is reinvesting in innovative housing by turning commercial property into residential property and stabilizing renters and homeowners. Action 3 is supporting resilient rural communities by implementing forest health strategies, investing in community colleges across the state, and supporting the agricultural economy. Action 4 is supporting Oregon's workforce, those that are currently employed but struggling, by targeting investments in workforce supports to BIPOC communities disproportionately impacted by COVID, with investments in career pathways, childcare, housing supports. Priority number 5 is creating workforce development opportunities for Oregonians by providing upskill or reskill opportunities to move individuals out of poverty, helping women to get back into the workforce, and leaning in on strategies to address the talent pipeline, such as those outlined in the STEM education plan. Priority number 6 is getting small business back on its feet by providing additional business relief and strategies related to main streets and downtown revitalization, and providing ongoing technical assistance. Priority number 7 is investing in infrastructure, both broadband investments in urban and rural areas of the state, as well as traditional economic development infrastructure investments such as for water, roads, sewer, wastewater, ports. Priority number 8 is Oregonians investing in Oregon by supporting opportunities for Oregonians to directly invest in Oregon-based companies through venture capital funding models. Priority number 9 is safely reopening Oregon's economy by promoting and enabling safe in-state travel and highlighting Oregon on an international platform with sporting events over the next 2 years. Finally, Action 10, as Courtney had mentioned, is promoting innovation in manufacturing by enhancing R&D and innovation across universities and industries, and supporting inclusive innovation and entrepreneurial development by targeting talent from rural and historically underrepresented communities. And finally, by incentivizing manufacturing and traded sector expansions. So I should note that these priorities are not ranked in priority order. So, you know, action number 10 is no more important than action number 1. Some of these priorities and actions are underway either through the governor's recommended budget for the 2021-23 biennium or included in current legislation that's under consideration this session. As far as timeline, we're still waiting for U.S. Treasury guidelines to be issued, which is anticipated to occur by May 11th. We're also waiting for the state's May revenue forecast to be released to better understand the parameters for how ARP dollars may be spent and what the state's budget outlook is. Meantime, the co-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee have released their own budget framework for 2021-2023 that relies on ARP funds to protect current state services from reductions and provides an estimated $780 million in new investments statewide to help the economy recover. We're hopeful that the governor's 10-point plan and guiding principles can serve as an initial sort of starting point for conversations with the legislature and with partners and community stakeholders across the state to help inform ARP funding prioritization. The governor seeks alignment between the Racial Justice Council, the legislature, and the programmatic and project priorities that are identified through her Regional Solutions program from communities across the state. And with that, I'll look forward to questions during the second portion of the agenda. And in the meantime, I'll turn it over to the well-known and dapper John Southgate. Thank you. John, you're muted. You're muted.
Well, what I was saying, thank you, Raihana, for that introduction. I may be dapper, but I'm also a nerd, which is why I'm using this phone. I have technical problems with my laptop, so thank you. And thank you, Pam, for inviting me to be on this august panel with John and Raihana. I'm going to do a little bit of history, a little bit of what the future might hold, and then I also want to talk philosophy. So history, the county board about 1.5 years ago made the strategic and I think wise decision to have its first ever economic development staff. And initially I was retained to help bridge from having no staff to having full-time staff. And I'm very pleased that Matt Craigie is our new economic development manager, and I've invited him to make a few remarks as part of my presentation with Pam's indulgence at the end of my remarks. So when I was hired, when I was brought on, an initial focus was on our smaller cities and our urban unincorporated areas, which are particularly without representation in the economic development arena. And then about 5 or 6 months into my work, COVID hit, and all of a sudden I pivoted to 80 or 90% of my work working with Pam, working with the other members of the board, with great leadership from the board, very supportive in doing a lot of important work to help our businesses, especially our small business community, and especially those in traditionally underrepresented communities, survive and get back on their feet. And I have a lot of data here. I'll spare the details, but one of the main thematics is that, as Pam always reminds me, that economic development is a team sport. And so you'll hear this when I talk about my philosophy. What we do together. And so I'm so pleased working with particularly Commissioners Treese and Willie, but also with wonderful partners around the region, certainly Raihana, the folks at GPI, but especially the cities in Washington County. We had formed a round table early on, actually before the COVID hit. And I think together, not to get too schmaltzy here, but we got a lot more done together. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So the county, I think, wisely agreed to share a lot of its largesse from the CARES Act with the cities, knowing that the cities know their business communities better than we do, and had systems in place that were better situated than we at the county were to serve all of our cities as well as unincorporated. So we got $10 million in grants out, actually, depending on how you cut it, actually more like $15 million in grants. We formed, with credit to Jonathan Taylor and Tualatin, formed business recovery centers focused on small business assistance. A lot of shoes have been worn out over the last year by our wonderful partners at the chambers and at Adelante Mujeres, going to individual companies one-on-one, building relationships, and linking desperate businesses with resources. We also did, we supported efforts in workforce, we supported the hotels, we partnered with Northwest Natural Gas and with PGE in a utility relief program for businesses that were in arrears due to COVID. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Northwest Natural Gas and especially Intel. They were early partners. Even before we got the CARES Act, we got private dollars to help in this assistance. So that's my history, and I could go into deep detail if you want. Pam has heard the speech too many times. Looking ahead, one of the things that I think Matt will speak to and certainly is giving a lot of thought to is how we are going to deploy the ARP dollars. We have one luxury with ARP that we didn't have last year. First of all, we have Matt Craigie, so we have two. But also, we have the luxury of time. Raihana mentioned that we still have yet a month before we get the guidance from the feds on how the dollars can be deployed. Meanwhile, Matt and his partners, the board, are thinking, we're with our cities, with the state, how are we going to wisely deploy these dollars? I felt last year with the CARES Act, we were always acting in haste and ad hoc. We'd find out, okay, you got this money from the state, you got a week to figure out how you're going to deploy it. We now have, we could be more deliberate and thoughtful, and we've certainly learned a lot of lessons. Again, I'll say the biggest lesson I've learned by far is the importance of collaboration, that we have done a lot more together. And I know I'm hopefully preaching to the choir and making that observation. I'm going to skip over the ARP because, again, I think Matt Craigie will speak to that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about philosophy, and no, I'm not going to talk about Aristotle here. I want to talk about my philosophy about economic development as sort of maybe a framework for how we go forward. And I hope, I welcome a discussion today, and I'm going to try to be brief so we could get to the Q&A. But what I want to say is that I think government's role in economic development at a high level is to set the table and get out of the way. And so setting the table means a lot of things: investing in infrastructure, creating partnerships with workforce, creating a talent pipeline, the regulatory framework, fees, incentives, land. Do we have enough land? I saw a question on that earlier. All those things you need, but I also believe that government should have modesty about what it can and can't do. We could set up the regulations. We could invest wisely in infrastructure. We could work on supplying land. But I think we should let the private sector do what it does best. And I'll give an example, and this is hopefully doesn't offend anybody, but when I first worked for the city of Hillsborough, we were working on bringing Solar World to Hillsborough. And in 2008, 2009, it was literally the largest solar panel manufacturing plant in the Western Hemisphere. So it was a great success. We all know what happened though, and it's those jobs are gone. And maybe I shouldn't use such a negative example, but I think that the point is the private sector setting up their success, but don't assume that we know here's the business of the future. And this is not to ignore the importance of understanding clusters and knowing that we have athletic apparel and we have high tech, and so what are things we could do in terms of trying to lure suppliers to support those industries, certainly, but again, a degree of humility. I think I'm going to repeat myself, but it's also done in partnership and relationship. The things that we get done are done by working among ourselves. Actually, Bruce Coleman from Sherwood is new to the Portland area, but he's worked in other states, and I remember meeting with him early on. He was struck how we really collaborate in this area. We don't compete. I don't look at Gresham or at whatever, Vancouver as, okay, we got to beat them, but rather a rising tide lifts all boats. And again, I'll quote the infamous Pam Treese that, how do you put it, Pam? There's no boundary in economic development. If Vancouver gets 1,000 jobs, if I'm working in different jurisdictions, sure, I'd love to get those jobs, and certainly my mayor would, but really we all benefit because it is one region. By the way, I want to allude, and maybe we'll get some questions about this. We are one region, and we're all in this together. And one of my friends, when I told him what I'm going to be doing, he said, "Oh, you probably get a question about what's happening right now in downtown Portland," which is where I'm sitting right now. This is my city. I've lived here my entire life. I love Portland, and we have real problems. And Washington County will be stronger with a strong central city. Clackamas County will be stronger with a strong central city. I just want to make that point. I think I want to respect everybody's time here. I guess the only other thing I wanted to say is it's all about the people. So Tom Hughes told me that when he was in Japan, he was visiting some CEO who told him that you have the best fire marshal in the world, a guy named Jeff Journs. Most of you probably don't know the name Jeff Journs, but he's one of those kind of unsung heroes, and who would look creatively at a permitting problem and find solutions that were responsive to the customer. And again, I hope I'm preaching to the choir, but to me, that's a really important quality is having people who have passion for what we do and are trying to create win-wins in partnership among ourselves, but with the private sector. I'll give a couple more examples really quickly, and then I want to turn it over to Matt. One example, I was just talking with my wife about this, about the Shakespearean Festival in Ashland. It's one of the best Shakespeare festivals in the country. And it started with a guy named Angus Bomer, who I think he was the head of the theater department at Southern Oregon at the time. And they put on, I think, 4 plays. And it was such a sad, sack little effort that they had to have boxing matches to help cover the losses from the presentation of the plays. Ashland's brand is Shakespeare and has done phenomenally well with that. The other example I want to give, since Intel is sort of a featured company today, is a guy named David Lawrence, retired from City of Hillsborough. But David is incredibly creative, and he saw the opportunity. There's this old failed subdivision from the 50s called Ronald Acres. Intel was looking for to make a major investment. David worked closely with the folks at Intel. I once asked him, he told me the whole story, at a high level, the whole story, and a couple times I said, "David, can you do that? Is that legal?" And he said, "I don't know." I'm going to get David in trouble for saying that. But anyway, with that, I'd like to ask Matt Craigie, who is my successor and is the first full-time economic development manager for Washington County. And thank you, John Tapogna, for letting us steal him from ECONorthwest. But with that, I'd like to introduce Matt. Thank you, Pam.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm the mystery panelist here. Just got promoted into this. So great. So thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity. My name is Matt. I'm the new economic development manager, taking over John's pretty big shoes here, helping out Washington County. So I can talk just for a couple minutes here and tell you a few of the things that we are working on and some of the initial thoughts about the county's role around economic development going forward. I do want to be clear that in the long run, I see it as an important step for us to be considering the development of an economic development strategy. I see a need for a clear framework that identifies the core assets and capabilities that we have to inform the work that we take on. So that's something that we're thinking about and we'd like to work with partners, again, in the long run. As for my kind of preliminary thoughts about the county's role and some of the reasons why this position was brought in-house, there's a few points to make here that touch on some of the things that John was saying. One of them is the recognition at the county level that communities like Aloha and Bethany, these unincorporated urban areas, and also some of the smaller cities like Banks and Forest Grove, Cornelius, don't have the economic development capacity like the larger cities of Hillsborough and Beaverton. So we're going to be focusing on helping a lot of those communities. Of course, these are diverse areas in geography, in population, in economy. And so what that support looks like is going to be different in each one of those communities. But I'm engaging with stakeholders to see what that's going to look like. One of the other things, and you're going to hear this if you hear me in other forums talking about this, is a refrain that I've been saying a few times over my first 5 weeks here, is that we want to be really thoughtful that this work is enhancing and not disrupting existing relationships and existing networks. So I'm spending a lot of time listening and talking to folks and thinking about the county's role. To give you an example, business recruitment relationships are terrific. Hillsborough and Beaverton have great staff and they work closely with Raihana and Business Oregon and others. I'm going to look for opportunities to support those conversations, but we're not in a position to lead those conversations today. Another point here, and I don't think that this is in conflict to the last point, but I do think that there's a real opportunity for the county to step up and to be thinking about convening and coordinating countywide conversations about economic development policy and shared challenges. So John talked a little bit about the CARES Act work, and we are getting prepared for the American Rescue Plan dollars. And it's really complicated. It is, John, I think you said three-dimensional chess when we were talking about it the other day. But it's a huge opportunity. So you've got allocations coming to local partners, you have allocations coming to the county, to the state, you have other federal agencies that are getting their own allocations. And so we really want to be thoughtful about how we're coordinating and leveraging all of those investments and working together to make sure that has the greatest effect in communities across the county. The last point here is how we do this work matters. And John was talking about this a little bit too, the collaboration. So right now I'm spending a lot of my time, like I am here today, talking with groups to get input about what businesses and workers need to continue to manage and to get out of the pandemic, and how to overcome those challenges and pre-existing challenges. So in the longer term, I really want to be thoughtful about how we're working to strengthen partnerships with the private sector and the communities of Washington County, in particular those of underrepresented communities that have not had traditional access to support and to capital. So like John was saying, I do believe that it takes intentional collaboration to find meaningful solutions that are impactful and that stick. And so I will continue to look forward to working with groups like the West Side Economic Alliance, community-based organizations, and others to inform how economic development work can be carried out equitably and to the greatest effect. So Thanks for letting me jump in and be the mystery panelist here, Commissioner Trace. I'd be happy to answer any questions too.
Thanks, Matt. And, you know, we're very pleased at the county that Matt has joined us, and we're thankful to ECONorthwest as well. So it's nice to have, you know, an additional face on this panel. At this point, what I'd like to do is go to our Q&A. In our Q&A section, we have 6 questions. 4 of them are from Jerry Mildner, and 2 of them are from, I believe it's Raihana Ansary. So others may chime in here along the way. So please ask your questions. But I'm going to start with Jerry's question. His first question was, Courtney Martin highlighted the governor's support for increasing manufacturing in Oregon, yet Metro studies with PBA, NAOP, and other partners have reported for several years the lack of industrial land inside Metro's UGB. Where should we be looking to for a new expansion of the UGB, or where should we be looking to a new expansion of the UGB for industrial purposes? What are the barriers to creating industrial land supply? Now, I'm going to pass that on to John Southgate and perhaps Matt, and since we don't have a Metro representative, we may want to give a short answer and table it for a discussion with Metro. That gave you a little bit of a backdoor there.
Well, the real short answer is, and I think most of you know, it's a very complex issue here. It's led by Metro, and jurisdictions have to make the case for how do we accommodate our 20 years of growth, and if not, what policy interventions might we make with our zoning codes, et cetera, and ultimately also land expansion. You know, actually, I will say, as a tee up to Matt, Washington County has been involved in those conversations, but it not having someone like Matt wasn't really represented. So I'm excited that the county, both on the residential and the commercial and industrial side, will have a more vigorous voice in that. And Matt, I imagine you've been involved in urban growth discussions in various hats that you've worn over the last 15 years. So maybe you might say something.
Sure. Yeah, happy to jump in here. This speaks to what I was saying during my 2 minutes here about an opportunity for the county to come convene a conversation around a really important topic. So this is one of these crucial conversations that we need to be having at the regional level, really, around economic competitiveness and how we are thinking about accommodating not just all of the population growth that we saw in John Tapogna's slide, how the Redfin numbers are up and people continue to move here. And we see anecdotally that that's happening through a lot of housing development. But we do also need to be thinking about where those people are going to be working and what the jobs are of the future. And so I am going to give you a little bit of that political answer today, that we do need to convene that conversation. And like John's saying, it's a very complex conversation, but it's very important that we have it, we host it, and we bring everyone to the table to be thinking about it, because it really is going to have major impacts on the competitiveness of this region and the jobs that are here and the livelihood of folks all across the greater Portland region.
Thank you, John and Matt. This question is for Raihana, and it came from Raihana Ansary, and it's, you mentioned STEM investment as part of the governor's 10-point plan. Why does this not include art or STEAM? Our state houses a number of design firms, large and small. Where do the arts fit into the 10 action items?
Thank you for the question. It's an excellent point, and I should note that the governor is certainly an advocate and supporter of our arts and cultural and civic organizations. It's certainly a part of what makes our region attractive from a tourism perspective as well. And earlier, I think a few months ago, the Legislative Emergency Board made available a significant amount of funds for venue operators, concert halls, civic institutions, both small and big, statewide. So they've definitely been accounted for. They're definitely a priority. And I think the governor is definitely, I think her 10-point plan, I think the arts would fall under other categories within the 10-point plan, like supporting Oregon's workers, supporting small businesses, and safely reopening Oregon's economy. But as for a specific call out, I mean, that's certainly something that I could make note of or recommend as something that should be included. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Raihana. I have a question for John Tapogna. And John, thank you for your presentations. As always, they're fascinating. And I will point out, and you did as well, that this session is being recorded, but also the slide presentations will be posted on our WEA site. But given your perspective, how do you think the state of Oregon and the region and the state of Oregon are doing with comparable locations around the country?
Well, Pam, I would say Oregon is in a top 10 position. I mean, on the public health front, we came out of the lockdown in relatively good shape. We had tough times in the summer and in the holiday season, et cetera. But I would say from the region and across the state, folks have been paying attention in a relative sense, relative to paying attention to public health officials much more closely than I think your citizens of most other states have. And that's an economic impact. I mean, those are lives saved that all have sizable economic value associated with them, and I think are going to put us in a good position coming out. I do think I think there's a reputational advantage coming out as well. They talk about disorder, maybe vis-a-vis protests at times in Portland, et cetera. Well, let's talk about a state that has organized itself to save its own lives and follow science and follow public health. I think that's a huge reputational advantage. With respect to the economic pieces, we've had a little bit more of a loss because we haven't gone out to eat as much, and we haven't gone into hotels as much as some other places, and that shows up in the numbers. But I think it works out in a cost-benefit analysis, and thankfully the federal government has come forward with massive relief, so that those losses and that pain is not as severe as it would be otherwise. I do think we come out of this pandemic and this recession with people a little bit. It's easier to move about the country and maybe move a little bit farther from your employer. A little bit more disconnection from your employer and their headquarters than there was in the past. So that means increasingly people can choose where they want to live, at least on the margin. And I think Oregon's in a perfect position, especially if it can get its housing policy right, to welcome folks from California, from Washington, and other places in the country.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Jerry Milner has another question about, there's about 3 initiatives that would potentially bring congestion pricing on our interstate system to the Portland metropolitan region: Rose Quarter, I-5 Bridge, I-205, and the Abernathy Bridge projects. And he'd like to know, does the governor support congestion pricing? And if so, does the governor have a preferred mechanism for introducing congestion pricing in our highway systems? Are our congressional delegation supportive? I'm going to ask Raihana, are you comfortable answering that question?
Sure, at least partly. Yes, the governor is supportive of congestion pricing. She has not identified a preferred mechanism in which to introduce that to our highway system yet. I think she's waiting on some stakeholder feedback and other information and analysis. But yes, she is supportive of congestion pricing as a concept overall.
Thank you, Raihana. Anybody else want to chime in? I would encourage any of you on this call that are interested in learning more about congestion pricing is that this is a frequent discussion item at the Westside Economic Alliance Transportation Committee, and we get reports all the time from ODOT and supported by others about what's happening. So, and as for WEA, I sit on the Region 1 Act as well. So we are in the loop on this, but those discussions have been mainly happening at the Transportation Committee. So we have a question.
I'll jump in on that one, Pam, just to say that congestion pricing is the answer at the back of the textbook. If we want to cheat, go back there and look. There's no amount of building or construction or infrastructure investment that's going to get us out of the congestion problems. You know, a year ago, you might have thought the pandemic was going to get us out of congestion, but you only have to drive around the metropolitan area over the course, even the last yesterday. I was trying to come into town on 26 and massive congestion, just trying to get on town on a late Sunday afternoon. So it is the answer. It's more of a political challenge than it really is sort of a technical question about whether the tool is right.
Thank you, John. Bruce Coleman has a question. He said, to tie into the last question, which related to how Oregon comes regarding the health issue, I wanted to ask, how is Greater Portland competing with peers such as Denver, Salt Lake, and what should we be doing if we are not competing as well? And that's from Bruce Coleman at the City of Sherwood. Who would like to field that question?
I'll go ahead and jump in there because we have looked at that as well. Again, I would say if you look at many of our peers, you know, some of them opened up a little bit more, and so you see higher death rates, but lower unemployment rates in the leisure and hospitality sector. So I'm thinking of a place like a Nashville or an Indianapolis or an Austin. So you've got that trade-off. You know, with respect to downtown, lots of concerns in all of the downtowns across the country. Sort of that bathtub emptied during the pandemic, people are working at home, et cetera. And the question is, what's going to happen on the other side of this? How many people are going to come back into those offices? And where are you going to get that downtown activity going again? To the best of our ability, as we've looked at office vacancy rates in downtown cores, it doesn't appear that downtown Portland, sort of despite all the press, is really all that much different than other places. In fact, probably a little bit better than San Francisco and New York City at this point. The question is not really where it sits now, but how does it proceed coming out of this? And I do think downtown Portland still struggles with this episodic rioting that I think in part has become disengaged from the racial justice protests of last year, and does have a considerable amount of unorganized, unsheltered homelessness downtown that is going to have to be resolved if the city's going to recover.
Thank you, John. Anybody else like to address that? Okay.
Am you on mute?
No, you really should get a better facilitator here, I think. So my apologies. We have another question from Razia Rushan, and this is directed at John Southgate and Matt Craigie, and that is, how are nonprofits being included in the discussions regarding partnerships and business relationships in order to fulfill the county's economic vision?
I'll start and then turn it over to Matt. I'll talk about past. Matt will probably want to talk about future. We actually had a nonprofit, as Commissioner Treese knows, a nonprofit grant program last year that was open for a long time and it was actually not fully subscribed. So we also, I should mention, partnered with our CBOs to a degree, but I think Matt is going to do more around both nonprofits and around how we integrate CBOs with our efforts to disperse these dollars.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And just to build on John's comment, you know, to support small businesses and micro businesses, we need to recognize at the county that we are going to struggle to make connections to many of those businesses, you know, because we are public sector, and public sector traditionally has a hard time kind of connecting with some of those businesses because of cultural barriers and other language barriers and things. And so I do want to make it a strong part of the work that we do with the ARP, and also going forward with economic development policy, that we are working closely with community-based organizations that represent and have connections through various communities across Washington County, to make sure that we're problem solving and connecting with the businesses that need capital and need technical assistance. So to give you an example of something that I'm working on right now, I've been working pretty closely with Adelante Mujeres and the SBDC out of PCC to put together an event this week, actually, where we're bringing as many CBOs into this conversation as we can to do a little bit of a debrief of the CARES Act dollars and how those were deployed. And then to pivot the conversation to where we are now in 2021. So, you know, definitely recognize that there are still many businesses, especially a lot of the smaller businesses and, you know, BIPOC owned businesses that are struggling more than others. And so I want to convene that conversation to help understand what their needs are and how we can help them with recovery. So I see, like John said, I see a larger role of interaction and engagement with community-based organizations and nonprofits in the economic development space going forward.
Thank you. We have a question from Michael Williams. Michael asks, small public-facing businesses have been hit the hardest by the pandemic. These businesses, in our experience, also tend to have more diverse ownership and workforces. We have found direct assistance, funding, and technical support to be effective strategies on many levels. Is this the type of support still being considered by the state and by the county?
I can start, Raihana, then you can jump in maybe to talk about the state's effort, but very much so. We do want to be thinking about a couple things. So John Southgate had talked a little bit about the CARES Act work last year, and how much of a rush it was to get a lot of the dollars out the door in the form of grants, and there was some technical assistance. Again, there are some businesses that still need dollars to keep their payroll and to stay afloat, but there's also a number of businesses that are going to see extraordinary growth this year, or could see extraordinary growth if they had technical assistance to maybe hybridize their business model to get online, or they could get a grant to, you know, a restaurant, opening up the patio space, things like that. So we want to be thinking about not just capital, but also technical assistance. So the business recovery centers, again, that came out of an idea in Tualatin that are across Washington County, I think is a terrific example of that. The work that MISO and other CBOs have been doing, I think I've just heard really great things as I get out and talk to folks. So I think we do want to be thinking about multiple levers that we're pulling to be supporting businesses across the board, and in coordination. Again, you know, part of the complication here is there are dollars coming to the county, there are dollars coming to local partners. The SBA has their own programs, and we need to work together collaboratively to think about how we are leveraging and not duplicating efforts. So Raihana, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk a little bit about that from your perspective at the state.
Thank you, Matt. No, I think that's right. I think the governor is absolutely wanting to coordinate with local governments around sort of resource alignment and leveraging of resources so that we don't, we want to bring added capacity, but we don't want to duplicate efforts where there are maybe unmet needs elsewhere. And as an example, I am involved in conversations with the city of Portland and Multnomah County on behalf of the state to have those very conversations around resource alignment as all this money is made available to the state and to the county and local jurisdictions. Yes, and absolutely small business, both technical assistance and additional financial assistance, I think, are both on the table for potential prioritization of the state's share of dollars. So maybe recapitalizing the funds or programs that were deployed earlier through Business Oregon, and again, with an emphasis on BIPOC-owned businesses and small businesses that have a large share of their workforce as BIPOC. So in short, yes. The answer to your question, Mike, is yes. Thank you.
So we have time for one more question, and this is kind of a long one. So think about this. This comes from Sheila Greenlaw Fink, and it's addressed to Raihana, but I think that others will have comments to make as well. Given the historic inequities faced by the BIPOC communities in Washington County in the housing arena and the massive immigration to the metro area paired with housing underproduction and stagnant wages, even the targeted efforts the governor has introduced face significant challenges in changing this trajectory. What advice do you have for local governments on where they can collaborate or shape state and federal resources for the highest impact? Homeless services, rental, home ownership, zoning. He points on this broad, complex issue for the role of government in working with or trusting and moving out of the way, as John Southgate said, for the private and nonprofit sectors. So I think the bottom line is, what's your advice for collaboration and moving the dial on the housing issue?
Well, I know there are current efforts underway. There are current tables. There's the Home for Everyone Coordinating Board with the city of, the Joint Office of Homeless Services through the city of Portland and Multnomah County and the city of Gresham to sort of have a coordinated continuum of care and look across governments and to prioritize investments. Certainly, I know sometimes folks feel like the city of Portland is absorbing a lot of the burden, and how do we have a regional conversation around housing and homelessness issues as they continue to grow and people are displaced elsewhere, and there are homeless encampments in places outside of the metro area. I think that those conversations are being had at Oregon Housing and Community Services, the state's agency for housing, and that's a big question. It's a big, complicated question. John?
Well, I'll just add, I'll note, first of all, having been involved in planning and zoning and redevelopment for decades, it's always struck me that just the weight of regulatory initiative is substantial, and regulations always come with good intentions. But I think one broad observation I'd make is for us to be more thoughtful about, if we do this, it will achieve this good end, but it's also going to add to the cost of housing. The other observation, a little bit different topic, is labor. I don't know what the answer, it's partly a workforce thing, but my impression is that, and John Tapogna could probably speak to this, that our construction labor workforce has not kept pace with our growth and the demand. And as a result, the cost of labor is really onerous. I thought with COVID it would slow down, and then I gather, John Tapogna, it's still proceeded at pace. It's continued on its 15 to 20% annual escalation, and that's not, you know, we need more people in our construction trades, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I'm all for that. I would also say broadly that the further you get away from a neighborhood, the easier housing politics become. But, you know, when you're trying to do politics at the neighborhood level, you know, folks might be in favor of housing supply. They're just not in favor of housing supply on their street. And so I think what you're starting to see is, for example, the Biden administration's infrastructure bill has a feature in it that basically says, look, if zoning reforms aren't in place in states and localities, they may not get certain, may not be eligible for certain infrastructure investments out of this bill. We're starting to sort of mimic some of what we saw out of the 2019 legislature with House Bill 2001 and House Bill 2003. And so I would also say that sort of the continuation and the extension of that great work in the 2019 session. You know, obviously the implementation of 2001 is just still getting there, the missing middle. But you know, what we have in front of us right now, we have now a 20-year forecast of regional housing needs that goes down to every city across the state of Oregon. I think what's missing at this point are some fiscal carrots and sticks from the state level to ensure those regional housing needs goals and estimates are met. And I think that's the next stage.
Well, thank you, everybody, for this conversation. It's been fascinating, and thank you to our audience for the great questions. I really appreciate that, and I think our presenters would agree that's really where the flavor of this discussion comes through loud and clear. So it's much appreciated. I'd like to ask Teresa to show the slide of, and special thanks to Intel for being our sponsor today and for our Forum Series sponsor, Legacy Health. And also, could you show the slide of our upcoming events? So for those of you who are members and want to hear more about things like value pricing or tolling, you might want to attend a transportation committee meeting. If you'd like to hear more about housing and what we're doing in that area, Land Use and Housing Committee is meeting on the 21st for our members. So, and we also have our Board of Directors meeting and our fundraising and golf committee meeting in early May. You will be receiving an electronic survey asking you to fill out, asking you to respond to questions regarding today's presentation. We really take those into account as we look forward to planning for the future. In fact, many of you said to us, we'd like to have a forum on economic development and what's happening, and here we are. So with that, a special thanks to everybody on the panel, again to our audience. Remember that all the information from today will be posted on the website, and if you have any further questions, please feel free to get a hold of any of us at WEA. Thank you and have a great afternoon.